Welcome subscribers, tea drinkers and force feedback fanatics to this video, our first impressions video on the Moza AB9 force feedback joystick. That's right, this is a full-on force feedback joystick for playing flight simulators with, and I have to say, it is absolutely incredible. In this video, this is not really a full review video, this is a sort of first impressions after having played Microsoft Flight Sim for quite a bit, and things that you should be aware of when it comes to this force feedback joystick. So this should help you decide whether or not it's something that you would be interested in, or whether or not it's something worth getting. So this is going to be a very dry video for those of you not interested, particularly in force feedback or the AB9 force feedback joystick. But tough luck. That's what we do at this channel. As always, if you enjoy this type of ludicrous content that only 3 people want to watch, make sure you subscribe, make sure you like, and if you do get one of these like an idiot, make sure to use our affiliate links to support us, because I really appreciate that. So, first things first, and first question we always get asked, how does force feedback work with flight simulators? Well, flight sims, a lot of them don't have native force feedback like driving simulators do. Some do, but most of them don't. And as a result, the way that force feedback is done on flight simulators is through telemetry. So the flight sim puts out the information of the aeroplane speed, the air pressure on the control surfaces, the G load of the aircraft. All that telemetry goes out, and your force feedback joystick has software that can then interpret that telemetry and turn it into force feedback. Now, with driving simulators, weirdly, the sim experience wheel, which we do have, that actually has the option to have telemetry force feedback, as well as the game using the game's force feedback, and to be able to blend them together. So the Moza AB9 joystick also has that. But it is kind of funny, in a way, that only the sim experience force feedback wheel allows you to do that with sim racing equipment. When you would have thought, given that that is like a really powerful tool to be able to choose and tweak your force feedback to how you want and not be limited to the developers' whims, you would have thought that's what all force feedback wheels would have now, given that we sort of plateaued at a quality that the hardware for sims is plateaued. You would have thought telemetry force feedback would be the norm, but it's not with driving sims. But weirdly, with flight sims, it is the norm. So weirdly, flight sims are ahead of driving sims in that regard. So the options you have in the software, given that the game doesn't actually have force feedback, it has the telemetry coming out of it. The options with the software is that you can have direct input, which is basically, that's purely the in-game, the in-game's force feedback. You can have telemetry force feedback, which is purely the telemetry-driven force feedback, the software taking the telemetry and then you setting it up, or a mixture of force feedback. You can mix the two together. The Moza software explains all that, what's doing what. But what you do find is at the moment, you basically can only use telemetry force feedback because it doesn't have its own force feedback with Microsoft Flight Sim 24. Also, what you will find as well is that often or occasionally when you load the game up, it doesn't, the software doesn't pick up the game, and so you have to click these options to get it to actually load the telemetry. And sometimes whilst you're flying, like maybe once every 3 or so hours, or if you do really crazy stunts and the plane goes mental, sometimes the telemetry seems to get a bit broken and you have to just re-click these to reinitiate the telemetry in the software. But basically, once you've got this up, once you've connected it, you do actually in the software, you have to add your game and link it up. It's like if you were linking SimHub, for example, it's taking the telemetry. Sometimes you need to have a software that picks up the telemetry. Once you've got that linked up, you can then do all the options for how much spring, how much damper, inertia, friction. That you can choose how much game the force feedback from the game's force feedback versus the telemetry, and you can adjust all that. And then you've also got even further settings where you can choose like the engine rumble if that comes through the joystick, what RPMs, the road, the taxi or the runway surface, if that has like a vibration and how that operates. And again, it's not a binary thing. It's not like you hit a rumble strip and it just rumbles. You could set it up like that. It's a lot of it is, as I say, like a sort of it's taking data from the game. So if it's a bumpier surface, you will actually feel the bumps in the surface. It's not just playing a default pattern, if that makes sense. You also have a key thing with planes is you've got the speed sensitivity. So as you go faster, there's more air pressure on the control surfaces, which makes it harder to pull a yoke or move the control surfaces because there's just more air weight, if you will. There's more pressure on the control surface. So as you go faster, the joystick gets stiffer. That makes it a lot easier to be really precise as you're flying faster in more nimble aircraft and not to over control them. And then you also there's all these settings. It's all that matters is there's loads of settings. We could do a full settings video. This is supposed to be an introductory video. We also have this general aircraft effects option where we can set the G-forces, and this is absolutely fantastic. And this is something that, unless it was updated more recently, but this is something that was missing from the Brunner with quite a few simulators. X-Plane had it, but Microsoft Flight Sim 2020, with the Brunner force feedback joystick, we couldn't do G-force effects. And these G-force effects are absolutely superb. So you can set the range of the G's with this, so the start point and the end point of the G's. This will like compact all the forces. This will make it the G-force less pronounced because it's operating the forces, the minimum and the maximum amount of forces based off this range. So depending on how fast of an aircraft or how many G's you're likely to pull, you can then dial this in per aircraft. And you can also set curves for the G's and how the G-force effect comes through, so you can make it so it's a bit more aggressive or less aggressive. Personally, I like to have it all really quite linear. The reason I like to do that is because the motors on the AB9 joystick are absolutely fantastic and really have great dynamic range, and also the nature of a flight yoke and how progressive and smooth flying is, it all comes together really nicely. But the key thing is you can adjust that, tweak it and save it and dial things in to how you want to. So what you end up really doing though is a lot of the preset profiles are a little bit weird. What you end up doing is dialing in your own settings, and then you can just import you save a file and import it. And so I have a few profiles here, so you can do like a small plane, large plane, you know, save your profile and load it. And also by exporting a profile you've done, when you load it, it will instantly load it, and joystick's exactly how you want it. Things worth saying though with this software is that some of these settings don't save properly. Some of these settings don't really make like you apply them and then you have to save it and then you have to load it for it to actually work. Some of the settings are a bit weird. So the engine vibration setting, for example, this doesn't seem to apply and work perfectly all the time. I fiddled with it and got it to something that works really nicely, and it corresponds. The joystick feels really great. We'll talk about the actual feel whilst we're flying. But it's a little bit janky. Also worth saying at this point in the video, for those of you using this, you have the we're using the extension, Z-axis extension on here, which makes a joystick taller, and that also allows you to have Z-axis rotation. By default, this is ticked on. This is in the axis travel and Z-axis option. This is ticked on, and by default, this then unfortunately causes the Z-axis to completely mess up, even when you've calibrated it. But you turn that off, and the Z-axis works fine. However, I don't like the feel of the Z-axis on this, and I'd much rather use rudder pedals. And really, it's really hard to fly helicopters using a Z-axis rotation, especially with the way the Z-axis rotation works on this joystick. But that's worth knowing. You can lock down with the Z-axis shaft, which gives it the extra height. You can also just lock it down, so it removes the Z-axis, but you get the shaft extension. So it's still the Z-axis extension thing's still useful, and I guess you could still use this for other options if you wanted to. Why would you want to extend the joystick? You get more precision. It's easier to be smoother. It also acts as almost a little bit of a sort of physical damper on the forces. It's much better for flying helicopters, and it means you can also put the joystick base lower between your legs if you wanted to. But you know, that's just a preference thing. Obviously, if the shaft is longer, it does effectively make the force feedback weaker, even on the high setting, because you have more leverage on the force feedback. Though it is still really quite good. Bloody hell, that's 13 minutes, and we're not even flying. I just wanted to get through that though, guys, because I think those of you looking to buy the type of joystick would probably be interested in that aspect of the software. Just to try and visually demonstrate for you guys the sort of smoothness here, like the way that you can set up the damper on this. So if I've got a spring on here by default, so that's like full spring on the joystick. So it's just bringing it back to the center. So that'll feel more like your sort of bog standard, off the shelf, non-force feedback joystick, though actually still very smooth and amazing. But so with the spring there, it's just pulling it back to center. If I turn the spring off entirely, now there's no center spring at all. So you can see that the joystick's just flopping around. And then just stuff like the inertia and friction and damper, all those things. So now it's like totally loose. Now the joystick is completely loose. If I put inertia up, it's like a dynamic damper, if you will, for as it goes faster, the inertia kicks in. And if I turn the friction up, I think the friction is actually applied to the I don't know if it's giving it a consistent amount of friction, but I think it's more applied to the forces and the telemetry coming from the game. Let's see what it says. I know it's just giving it a general friction feel, but it's quite light. Oh yeah, no, you can actually feel it, but it's quite light. It's just consistent friction. It's as if you had well, it's just friction, but it's quite subtle. Yeah, so the point is you can set all this up and get a really good feeling. If you're playing helicopters, you probably don't really want spring on it. You just want to feel the force. And ideally, like with a driving simulator, you don't really use a centering spring on a racing sim, because the cars and the physics in the game will effectively act like a centering spring. Just because the geometry of the wheel and self-aligning forces will be a natural inherent centering spring that's dynamic. That's what you should get from planes if you set it up perfectly, but just for convenience, it's quite nice to have a very small amount of spring on it, so the joysticks generally go into the center. That's what I tend to use. But finally, one thing with the software, it has the same bug that the Moza Pit House software has, where sometimes if it loads onto the wrong window, it then crashes, and so you have to launch it from the start bar on the monitor that you're actually that you installed the game on, or that you closed the software on. It's a bug that Moza haven't fixed with the Pit House or the Cockpit software yet. Hopefully they do fix it. Also, I think if you run window scaling, so if you've got like a 4K screen and you put your window scaling to like 125, I think that also causes issues with it. So that's something to be aware of. But generally, if you launch it from the start bar on the monitor that it loads onto, then it will work fine. Hopefully Moza fix that. Right. Dear God, Cessna here. So this is what we've been flying mostly with this joystick, and we're ready to fly. And the way I've got it set up in the software, as I say, I have a really nice, at the moment, there's a really nice high frequency vibration for if I move the flaps. I can feel what would be a reasonably normal sort of flap type grainy feel of the flaps extending, and move them. I mean, you can't really feel it. It's very hard to do in a video, but I'm trying my best. As I put the flaps down, I can feel, and I can set the strength of this, a force for the flaps going up and down. It's just a nice vibration. But already that's a really nice indicator that something is happening and that your flaps are actually moving without you having to look at them, which is cool. And it's a stupidly simple thing. We have a low frequency vibration for the engine. The plane is parked, the engine's just, the propeller's just turning around a bit and the plane's wobbling a little bit. I have actually been in a real Cessna and the thing is unhinged on the ground. When you just turn it on, you're like bouncing up and down. So it's quite funny having it like this on the joystick, have the joystick wobble just from the engine on. It's just a vibration, but it's really, really nice. Again, you can dial in the degree to what that feels like and how much it vibrates and doesn't, and that's a preference thing. You could have it totally stiff if you wanted to, but I like this. It's quite immersive. It's a chilled out plane. We're not hyper precise flying, and we're not even moving yet, so it's nice to have that kind of vibration. Also, you can set it up so that at the moment the propeller's not on, so we've not got high RPM, so there's not much airflow on the rear, the tail of the plane. And what you find with a real Cessna is that when it's parked, you've just turned the engine on, until the RPMs are up and there's airflow over the rear, the joystick or the yoke will flop forwards, and when you turn it on, it will start lifting the tail, and then that'll actually lift up this from a dead position to you've got airflow on it, and you can set that up in the software. I think we've got that set up properly. But yeah, it's just really nice effect. It makes it feel like it's coming to alive. So let's try that. We've got the parking brake on here. Yeah, we've got the parking brake on, and see if this makes it come alive. I'm just going to hold it with my little finger so it stabilizes. No, we've not got it set up properly. So normally if you did that, that would lift it up. But when we're flying, it will stabilize. I think it's doing it based off airspeed at the moment, which is something we need to tweak. But that's a nice, it's a gimmicky thing and a nice little effect. Let's go. Let's go. Flaps up. Yeah, right. This is London City Airport. There you go. So as I start speeding up, the joystick's going to lift itself up a little bit slow. So not ideal. But the point is, oh my goodness. Okay, there's a little bit of wind at London City. I don't know what happened there. Textbook takeoff. Oh no, hang on. What is going on? Is it that windy? Oh, it is actually really windy in the UK at the moment. Jesus. Okay. I thought I'd like got my rudder pedal messed up. Let's have a look at the windsock. Right, well, this is quite good for testing the force feedback. Apparently there's a tornado in the UK. It is actually really... It is actually really windy in the UK at the moment. Like, my drain pipes are rattling on the building. So this turbulence here, as we turned around from flying into the wind to some degree, and you can see the joysticks now flopping around from the turbulence. Now, we've actually got it set quite mild. So it's because it's nice and chill. Otherwise, your joystick can throw you around all over the place. You know, so we got it set out quite nice. In real life, this amount of turbulence, you'd be smashing your head against the ceiling. You wouldn't necessarily feel it feels so much a variation on the yoke in a real aircraft. In some things you can, some things you can't. You have to think in a real aircraft, the forward momentum of the aircraft in this case is 100 knots, and so that'll be applying basically 100 knots worth of air pressure over the control surfaces, so that would stabilize the yoke to some degree. And also in a real aircraft, the yokes actually feel terrible. Like the plane I flew, it was awful. It was worse than like the worst sort of sim racing yoke, like dampened, horrendous, sort of imprecision. It doesn't really matter in a real plane because you feel the G-forces like in a real car. It doesn't matter if the steering wheel's a bit bad because you can feel the G-forces, and you know, real life physics have like a good degree of depth to them. But in terms of an input device, you have to think a real yoke is going through cables that then go along the aircraft to the wings, and then each one of them's got like pulleys and stuff, and they have to be oiled, and maybe they're not lubricated fully. So there's all this like stiction and God knows what going on. Anyway, so the way we've got it set up at the moment is that that's a beautiful view. Turbulence is wobbling the joystick a bit. It does take the turbulence from the simulator. So it just really adds another layer of immersion. Also, now we're up to a bit of speed here. The rumble on the joystick is reduced, and it just feels like a really sort of Xbox controller type vibration that's going on. That you know, it just feels like you're in a plane with an engine running. And on my rig, with the way we've attached this, it's vibrating the rig quite nicely, so it almost gives me a bit of a tactile transducer motion rig type feel, which is really quite nice, actually, surprisingly compelling. So let's look at that lighting as we go over London. So a big thing with the Brunner AB9 joystick is that you get, with force feedback joysticks, this is the case with the Brunner as well, one of the big things, before you even get to the force feedback applying dynamic effects, a really big aspect of them is that you just have a ridiculous smoothness to the input. Like, the precision you can have is beyond what you would have with a real flight stick, and it's just super precise and smooth. You don't feel any motor cogging. You can really fight it with like a you know, you can absolutely just be really tiptoey input. And this is actually crucial if you're someone that does a lot of flight sim or just really likes precise input. Again, in a real aircraft, you can be doing like millimeter movements on the yoke. So when it's not too turbulent, there'll be like little movements that are offsetting the aircraft's position, and you would look at the engine cowling, and you'd see in the distance what's the engine cowling pointing at. And in this case, you can see like there's a little pixel, a white pixel right in the distance, probably like 20 miles away. And you can be like, oh, okay, is that lined up? And then when you get the little motions from the aircraft, you can then just tiny millimeter inputs to counteract the little movements that you get from the way that the air's pushing the plane and everything else that's going on. And there's a fine balance between overflying an aircraft and inducing movement that's going to be just pointless and uncomfortable, and doing little movements that actually make things more stable. But it's something that's really quite satisfying, and I think you need a joystick that's just that precise. When you're playing on a gamepad or when you're playing on cheaper joysticks, they're just really, quite frankly, they're not actually precise enough to allow you to have the degree of input that is sort of required, unless you were to use some kind of smoothing, but they're sort of required to really understand the depth of real world aircraft and the input of aircraft, especially when it comes to helicopters. Look at this sideways movement we've got with this weather. I mean, it looks amazing. We're crab walking across London. Nanny! Look at this. What is this wind speed? I've never flown over London in a flight sim with this much. This is just from the weather we've loaded into, and it is really windy. It looks gorgeous though. When Flight Sim 24 works, it's actually pretty damn good when it works. So that degree of input is absolutely fantastic with this joystick, and I would say same with the Brunner as well. That smoothness and precision utterly transforms helicopters and utterly transforms how you actually fly aircraft. Separate to that, again with the force feedback, so this is where the G-force effects, as I say, come into it a bit, is that when you've got the G-force effects on, as I turn like this, and so I'm just holding that, and we're not pulling that many Gs, so it's not giving really many G-force effects, but I can feel it just slightly building up the Gs, and as I pull back on the stick, and we're starting to pull, we are actually now starting to pull more significant Gs, we're also losing speed there, you can feel the Gs build up in the stick. If you didn't have a force feedback joystick, you just wouldn't feel anything at all. You just wouldn't notice it, and you'd be like, "Oh, hang on! Oh, look, the screen's the speed's decreasing on the screen. The noise is changing. The radius is maybe tighter, but you wouldn't feel it." Just the crucial thing is if you're someone that likes to play games off feel, and you're an intuitive person, I think in real life when it comes to sports and activities, like. I definitely think there's different types of people, and there's some people that learn stuff in a kind of methodical, robotic way, and they maybe don't have a particularly good feel for stuff, and then there's people that learn stuff by how it feels to a very high resolution. If you're one of those people that do stuff through feel, these type of G effects, force feedback in racing games, absolutely is pivotal and transforms what you're doing, because you're responding to the feeling, not the visuals and the sound, or the feeling is just as important as the other aspects. And it's really good, and I think the human brain actually, for people that are good at sports, I think the human brain is better at balancing things based off feel, based off and sort of increase and decrease of forces. It's like how you understand when you're moving, when you're stopping on skis, if you're skateboarding, if you're playing tennis and you hit a tennis ball, the amount of mass and weight to the ball when you hit it, that denotes how hard you've hit it. There's all those, is feeling. It's not just you've moved the racket at 15 miles an hour and the ball's hit this position. do you know what I mean? So the G-force effect is absolutely amazing, and not only is it massively immersive, it really helps you fly way more precise, and especially when it comes to landing, if you're trying to do really sort of satisfying landing challenges, and you really want to nail it, and you really want to be as smooth as possible, being able to really feel how much you're just getting into the ground effect a bit, and you're keeping the plane nice and stable. It's just really nice. If you're doing racing as well, like the Red Bull stuff we've not tried yet, but with more snappy, faster aircraft, you could set the G up to line up really well with where the maximum amount of G is before the plane starts to basically stall when it's horizontal, or lose its sort of peak like effective capacity or lift whilst in the turn. So you could actually get a competitive advantage from it as well. Not that Flight Sim is really a particularly competitive game, but you know, it just really connects you to what's going on. So another thing outside of that the G-force effect, the immersion, and how that actually helps you fly, the range of this stick is absolutely fantastic. Like, normally when you're flying an aircraft, you're probably only going to be using, especially a Cessna, you're going to be using really quite small inputs, and like with a car, with an aeroplane, you're going to let the aircraft do most of the work, and then you work with the work that the vehicle's doing. And again, that's what's really satisfying from a gameplay perspective, is that you internalize and understand the physics of what the physics object wants to do. This is with real things as well. You learn the reality of what it wants to do, and then you work out how to work with that in the most productive way. It's like a weird compromise between your intention and the reality of physics. And that is super satisfying, and probably the most enjoyable part of flying and driving. Something that no one ever talks about. I feel like I'm insane on this, but it's obviously the truth. That's just how it is. That's what's fun about it. I don't know why people don't talk about it. And so yeah, you're normally just doing small movements and working with the aircraft, feeling the forces to feel what was productive and what wasn't. But if you want to do larger movements, you can do like much larger movements, and you've got that freedom and space to do really big corrections or overcorrections or overfly. And in some scenarios, you will be doing small stuff, especially with like a helicopter, and then you might actually need to give it a big bit of welly to the left or the right. And crucially as well, at lower speed, and this is a really nice thing with force feedback, at higher speeds, you don't need to move the joystick as much, because, as I say, there's air pressure on the control surfaces. Things are going to be much more snappy and responsive. However, as you get to lower speeds and there's less air pressure and you're closer to stalling, you will have to do bigger movements on the stick to get the same sort of results, because there's less air pressure, so the plane's going to be less responsive. So look at this, just to do little bits of movements here as we approach a stall, you really will have to do quite large inputs to effectively achieve the same sort of input. And this is really nice, because I can feel that the engine's gone down in speed due to the vibration. The stick's got lighter due to the lack of speed, and we should start stalling. Do a nice little smooth stall here. There you go, stall alarm's going, and you can see now the plane's got super vague, and the input is really sloppy with no really response to it, and the stick just feels rather dead from that, which is, you know, I think that's what happens in real aircraft. But either way, it's very satisfying, really fun. I mean, I've not done that degree of a stall in a real Cessna, so I don't know how vague and sloppy it gets. But I'd imagine it would be something along those lines, though probably still quite different because the simulators are all very different from actual reality. At the end of the day, they're all approximations. But yeah, having that extra range is absolutely superb. Really does give you again, it's a more immersion, more control, more stuff to play with. What more could you want? Before anything else pops in my head with force feedback, I think we've talked about most of the points. Oh, you can set for stalling, you can have like baked in vibrations for like stall buffeting. If you're flying passenger jets, real world passenger jets, they're not fly by wire, apart from, well, really old ones are, but newer planes, they're all they are fly by wire. The stick's not fit, or the yoke or the stick is not physically connected to the control surfaces anymore. They're all electronically controlled. Modern planes have stick shakers built into them, so that when you're getting into a stall, or if you're going too fast, or a whole bunch of system stuff has a stick shaker. That's often, you'll hear that clicky sound as well in flight sims. That's normally what that is. You can set all that up as well. Obviously with a force feedback joystick, you could probably do that as just a basic vibration though, with even a gamepad. But all that stuff obviously can be set up and works perfectly fine. But I think the more interesting part of force feedback joysticks is the dynamic aspect and the G-force part of it. It's the stuff that I go on about with, like, what's missing from ACC and many other sims, is the important part of force feedback for actually flying and actually doing stuff is the dynamic range of the forces, the weak to the strength, and that correlating with the physics that are going on in the game. So that is, with this joystick, this has really good dynamic range from its two 9 Newton meter motors. This is going to be interesting landing this. Look at this, we're flying in a straight line over London City here, and our ground speed is like 200 knots and our airspeed is 123 knots. Does it say ground speed on the... I'm not looking at the screen to see the ground speed, I'm just guessing it. But bloody hell, it is windy in the UK, so this should be an interesting landing. Look at that. Super drift 2 plane. Oh dear, this would be terrifying in real life. Makes you really appreciate how air is separate to the ground. So in terms of this joystick, it's the M816, which is the same as the joystick that comes with the HOTAS Warthog by Thrustmaster, and it also uses the same connector that the Thrustmaster joysticks use. It's kind of, I think Verpil uses the same connector. Quite a few companies use the same connector now. It's become like the default flight stick connector. Exactly the same shape and design as the Thrustmaster one, same buttons as well. It doesn't feel as solid as the Thrustmaster joystick, but the ergonomics are exactly the same, and functionally it's basically the same. Buttons are a little bit more clicky on this, whereas the Thrustmaster ones feel a little bit sort of more sticky feeling. You know, they don't have as a decisive click to them on the Thrustmaster stick. However, the Thrustmaster one definitely feels more like a legit aircraft stick. The only real fighter plane joystick I've touched was one in a museum, and it did feel a bit like didn't have a simple positive click to it. It was kind of a bit mushy, though I'm sure it ranges massively. Functionally though, having a positive click for a game controller and for this is really nice, and actually in some ways works better than the Thrustmaster stick. Because the Thrustmaster stick, you'd be pushing, you're not sure if you've actually actuated the button. At least with a defined click, you know for sure that you've pushed that button. And when it comes to like the hats, it's really easy to know, well, you've hit the left, top right, you know, bottom, two bottom left, two bottom right. So actually, functionally, I think this arguably functions better than the Thrustmaster joystick in a sense. But the Thrustmaster stick feels more like a real aeroplane stick, if that makes sense. A little bit more meaty. This being lighter though as well, actually might be better for, given when you're using the extension shaft, that means it's less inertia for the base to work with. But you could use the Thrustmaster stick on this, presumably same connector and things. I'm not sure how it works with the software, but Yeah, and in addition to the Thrustmaster stick, with this one you get the additional toggle here, which is great for flaps or whatever you want, and another hat on the top. And you can remove this part. This bit can be removed if you want to. But yeah, I've had no problems. So I said about probably like 10-15 hours of flying now, and I've had no issues with the stick so far, with the actual joystick feel. The trigger actually has a nice pull, initial pull and a click, and then a sort of like a resistance to the next click. So that's quite nice. And the Thrustmaster one's just a bit of just a spring. Let's bring her in, guys. Let's bring her in, probably badly. But yeah, no. So the actual package of this. So this is more of a. This video's turned out to be very long, but as a first impressions, the actual package of this AB9 joystick, compared to the Thrustmaster stuff, obviously force feedback joystick just kills anything else on the market that I've used. Compared to the Brunner, I've found that the AB9, the software is easier to use, though still a bit janky, but it's easier to use than the Visual Basic type software that you get with the Brunner. Oh my god, there's turbulence. The software is easier to use and has more options and seem to work out of the box better than what we got with the Brunner, and it connects more seamlessly, loads faster, it's more immediately intuitive. So the software is better. The motors feel like they've got more dynamic range. I think that's mostly because they're just stronger motors. Jesus Christ. It's not even... The plane's falling over on the runway. Oh my god, it's trying to take off. Yeah, these are probably conditions you wouldn't fly a Cessna in. We have a spine. That's a good landing. So the motors are... this extra strength, I think, really helps give more fidelity to the motors than what you get with the Brunner. The strength also gives you more to fight against. A big problem I had with the Brunner is if you're flying like the acrobatic planes or faster jets and you want to pull on them and you're sort of tugging back with the Brunner, what you find is that the Brunner starts overheating quite quickly, and then the force drops off, which then obviously gives you the impression that you've actually lost G-forces in the flight sim, or you know, something's happening with the plane, but it's just a force feedback device changing. So that's not really ideal, and that then forces you with the Brunner to run weaker force feedback, so it can never actually get to that point where it's almost clipping. I've not experienced that happen at all with this Moza joystick. It's always given this full strength of force. I think at a point it can start clipping, and it will go down in temperature, but if you were to cut this down from, it's 9 Newton meters per motor, 12 Newton meters total, when you combine the two and work out the forces at the angles. But if you were to cut each motor down to the settings in the game to like 6 Newton meters or 7 Newton meters, so then you've got quite a bit of overhead, you still have something really strong and impactful with no chance of it ever overheating or having, you know, with it then having to go down. As I say, I've not had it overheat yet anyway, but so just that headroom you get from the stronger motors is really, really good, I think. There you go. I mean, that is a pretty much the most insane first impressions rundown of a joystick. I wanted this video to be like a 10-minute quick first impressions. Oh dear. But I think this hopefully is a very useful video for those of you thinking of getting one, or those of you that are a bit curious about force feedback devices and just wanted more information. It's very hard for me to explain all this stuff whilst we're talking to chat and live streaming, so that's a bit of an information dump. Feel free to ask any questions in the comments. I do try and answer them. Sometimes I miss comments because obviously we're really successful and it's so important and busy. I can't keep up with everything, but I try and answer the questions. Yeah. As I say, if you do get one, please do use my links. I do get a percentage of the sale. It does add up. It does help pay for my ludicrous hobby addiction that we do, and that allows us to do completely unproductive live stream and make joke videos. So I appreciate that because it's good fun. That's it, really. That is it for this video. Till the next one, guys. Happy tea drinking. I'll catch you in the next one. Goodbye.